Good evening, all. Hope you're all doing well on this Friday night, September 4th. Mark Largent joins us tonight. Mark, how are you doing?
I'm doing excellent. How are you, Alec?
I'm doing great, and I am so envious that you in your office have an old school comic rack.
I had two.
Two?
I have two, yeah.
Damn you.
Go
Go ahead. No.
When I was a teenager, I didn't live anywhere near a comic shop. That was still early days for comic shops. And I would go to the local convenience store for comics. And they had set the two comic racks that they had out by the dumpster. I guess they were getting new ones. And so I immediately called my dad and I said, bring the station wagon, and loaded them up. And so since I was a teenager, I've had these two comic racks. I've got one in storage though. They take up a lot of room.
I guess.
Plus, the nostalgia is great.
Listen. You used to buy all my comics off racks just like that. I'll never forget when the comics went up to 20 cents, and I was like, 20 cents. Like, I can only buy for $1. I remember it was our stationery store in Huntington, Long Island. And, same one I always used to buy my comics from. And I walked in there and I was like, 20 cents. Now people laugh. But
because now they're like $5.
Yeah. I mean, it was, my first comics were 12 cents each that I was buying. And then they went to 15 and then 20 and then 25, I guess, after that. But
I think 25 was probably the lowest I ever saw when I was a kid. I was born in '68, but
I was born in
Oh, that's right! Happy birthday! I saw it was your birthday yesterday.
Yes, I was. I turned 60 yesterday. Holy crap!
That is a holy crap. Yeah,
that is a holy crap moment. It's like that's like. I'm like, is my dad's? I guess my dad's 60. I mean, it's like, my dad's actually 80. What did my dad say he was? 84? 84.
Okay.
84. I think he's.
I'm trying to think.
But yeah,
my dad's 70s, I think, still.
Is it? It's crazy because I'm still in pretty damn good shape and I don't know. It's just. I don't know. Anyway, let's move on to happier subjects. my ever advancing age. So, what is listen, you're based in Dallas, you said. North Dallas.
That's correct. Yeah? Yes.
And excuse me. And what do you do for a living professionally? What do you do? Certainly you don't make animated Star Trek episodes professionally.
No, unfortunately nobody pays me for that.
Well, they should.
Well, they should, but
right?
We're rapidly running out of old guys like us who are the ones who are the audience for it.
Well, and I think Lower Decks just shows you exactly who the audience.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so funny to hear some of my friends were like, "Oh, it's too fast and too loud." I'm like, "Man, you're old."
There's a generational divide for sure with that.
Mm-hmm.
No, I work as a creative manager for a company. I make sure that the stuff that goes out can be printed, and if need be, I design stuff. But yeah, with the COVID, I've been working at home since March, which has been great for working on City on the Edge of foreclosure because. When things are slow, I've got my work computer next to my home computer so I can set something to render and go back and forth between things. But I'm more than 2/3 done with this one. So finally, after 2 years, I'm reaching the end.
Well, so tell everyone how Stalled Trek started.
Way back in the olden days, I worked for a school that it was a school for mathematics and science. It was a residential high school. and I was their recruiter, public relations guy. So we had internet access back in the early 90s. And when websites came along, I had a Star Trek fan page. And it was called Largent's No New Trek page, which everybody thought meant I didn't want any new Trek, but it was all the original series stuff. And of course, back then you designed your website to be 640 by 480 pixels. It was ridiculously small, but I was always trying to find stuff to put on it. And I was doing like an episode guide, and was talking about the fact that Spock early on was referred to as a Vulcanian instead of a Vulcan. And I did a typo. I accidentally typed Vulcanine, and I laughed at the thought. And then the thing I always thought about in my time was that it was Spock going into heat. And so suddenly just all these dog jokes, puns occurred to me. And I thought, wow, I wonder if I could do an animation on the website. And this is pre-Flash, we had animated GIFs, that was about it. And I realized I couldn't do full, but I could do it sort of like a comic book on the website. And like you said, the images were so small, you couldn't put like lettering on it. So it would have an image of the panel, and then the text would be written out next to it. And then I had a couple of animated GIFs. And so I was doing a Mutt time was what I called it. And
sorry, my dogs are raising hell down below my desk.
The stalled Trek came from a joke about me and my friend talking about Voyager, which was around at that time, and about the fact that the crew should really get annoyed every time they stop at a planet because it's keeping them from getting home. So we were talking about it being a stalled Trek, that they were every time they did anything, they were stalling. And so that's where that came from. And I did a fair amount of it on the website. And then I went to my very first Star Trek convention, which was in Huntsville, Alabama. It was it was the 30th anniversary, 96. And the entire original cast was there. And I think that was actually the last time they were all together. And they also had astronauts, too. There was a space center there, so it was pretty cool. But 3 days of Star Trek, and I suddenly was Star Trek'd out. And so my website didn't go anywhere for a long time. But I kept coming back to it. I did. I eventually did like a comic book version of it. And every once in a while, I'd still get it. And then once I found out that you could do 3D animation, I thought, well, that would be a way to do Star Trek. So from 96, when I started it, I finally finished it in 2012. It only took me 3 months, but it took me all those years on top of that. So it was a thing that it was just this thing that kept gnawing at me to do it. And the first time I ever showed it in public was at a convention, and the first question was just why. I'm going, well, I can't explain it. It's just something that I wanted to do. But so that's where it came from, and I immediately thought, well, I could do more. But every time I finish one of these things, they talk about women that after they give birth, at some point they forget the pain because otherwise they'd never have another child. That's the way it is with this. I don't want to do it, but at a certain point I forget how hard it is, and then I start another one.
And how many of them have you done?
So I did a Mutt time. Then, of course, Prelude to Axanar was a short. That one kind of, it was an actual parody of an episode, obviously. And then this all ahead full, as I started City on the Edge of Foreclosure, the software that I'd been using no longer was supporting the Mac. It was old software, and the company kind of wasn't in business, and they had, I think, a guy in Germany who was keeping it alive. So I had to switch over to new software, and I went with Blender. And so this was my sort of proof of concept, was could I do something in Blender? So this was just a quickie. There wasn't really a parody of any episode. Then, of course, it worked out. So a year later, I'm still trying to finish. This one was much harder than A Mutt Time was.
And here's one of your posters for Prelude to Axanar. So Prelude to Axanar was your third film?
That's right, because I had done a parody of The Walking Dead called The Wobbling Dead.
Okay.
In fact, that's where it came from. I noticed somebody in the YouTube comments had noticed that Darn's little symbol on his chest is actually Rick's sheriff's badge from The Walking Dead.
Yeah, very cool.
But I can't remember what I was planning on doing, because it worked out to, I did Mutt Time in 2012, Wobbling Dead in 2014, and then in 2016 I did Prelude. And I think I was actually working on a Lone Ranger parody. I really wanted to do a Lone Ranger parody, but the problem was I couldn't find a hook. I'd already joked with people that doing a parody of a 50-year-old TV show doesn't really get you in with the in crowd.
Yeah, of course.
So I was thinking about going even farther back to the Lone Ranger. Yeah, and then of course there's, nowadays, how do you deal with Tonto? How do you, nobody, short of people, well, really older than me, I was kind of an anomaly in liking the Lone Ranger, was going to get it. So it just never went anywhere. I had fun with and then so I did Prelude. Just sort of came out of, and this was the one that I did in, I want to say it was like 33 days or something.
I know you were on fire. Jonathan told me.
This was a marathon, because of course I was petrified that the lawsuit would end before
and ruin your film. Damn it!
That's right. Yeah. I wanted to make sure that you stayed on the frying pans while I finished my film.
Well, we're glad we can help you in that regard. There.
Yeah, so I appreciate all your sleepless nights.
I bet Jonathan was somehow stoking the fans, so the flames somehow. But Jonathan, it was his idea to keep it a secret, because originally I had just basically made this as a joke, and he said, "Is it okay if I share this with Alec?" I said, "Sure. If he has a sense of humor about it, that's fine." And then I opened my big mouth and said, "Well, I could probably make this." One of the fun things about doing Star Trek with this is that there's infinite amounts of information out there. Like if you were just going to do something, you're not going to find the websites where they have blueprints of the sets. You're not going to find, at the time, I always get the two Star Trek fan series mixed up. Star Trek New Voyages, Star Trek Continues.
Yeah, I think it was Star Trek New Voyages had some kind of forum, and they had just endless amounts of memos and stuff. I remember one of the things that I was stuck on for a little while was the transporter effect.
Oh,
because,
okay.
Everybody talks about the transporter effect as, you have the person there, you replace them with sparkles, and then they fade in or whatever. But they had a memo that pointed out that Roddenberry had said, don't have them fade into color, have them fade into one color first. So they actually fade in yellow. And then that transitions to them to the color. And so they had a yellow outline. So it wasn't just the sparkles to the person. It was the sparkles to this yellow color and then the person. And that was like, oh, wow, now suddenly it makes sense. So you had just endless amounts of resources that you wouldn't have if you were going to try to do some other kind of thing. But with Prelude, I kept thinking, well, the gag is that everything is being redacted or taken away because of copyright infringement, which means I don't really need to make any of the ships. I don't have to have any of the battles. I can get away with just saying, image redacted or something like that. And then at that point, you're mostly just talking about having the puppets talking. So that was relatively easy to do. Oh, that's the movie poster I did.
It's awesome. It's fantastic. Well, you know what? And it basically reminds me of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. The ending of that. Right? You don't give us the ending. Like
no, it all just comes to a halt. But this movie poster, what I loved were all the old Jack Davis movie posters for like It's a Mad World and that kind of stuff. And you don't see a lot of movie posters that are mostly white, even though I didn't do the full thing. That nowadays it's mostly just stacked heads. And so when I was looking around to do something different, I found that and the giant stone copyright symbol of crushing everybody was just perfect.
As a matter of fact, you gotta send me the art. We gotta use these as stretch goals in our Kickstarters. Like we'll do like a Prelude to Axanar stretch goal. That would be freaking hilarious.
Yeah. So that one doesn't have that one has the first two film festivals it was in, but it doesn't have the third one where we actually won best fan film.
Yeah, no, I know.
For the parody of a fan film.
Right, I know. That's awesome. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're actually going to show it. Now, I uploaded Prelude to Axanar to the Axanar page today, and we already have like 2,000 views on it already.
That's incredible.
People are loving it. People are absolutely loving it. And so we're gonna play it now for everyone. It's a good way to kill 7 minutes. And let's take a look here. I'm gonna stop that, and I'm going to. Here we go. Oh wait, I made the classic mistake. Share audio, because I do that all the time. All right, let's make screen audio. Here we go.
Start date 1234 point and counterpoint. The planet, are you kidding us? A shining example of the conflagration of planets. It represents the pinnacle of human civilization as we know it.
No one would have believed that smelly humans could have succeeded in creating something like the conflagration of planets. I mean, if we volcanines were capable of showing surprise, my face would have done this. Huh?
But that feeling wasn't shared by the Clapon Empire, who said, if words were water, we would all make glug-glug noises when we talked. They sent the conflagration of planets a welcome to the neighborhood basket they would never forget. We did not appreciate the Clap-On's gift and chose not to send them a thank you note. I personally removed the Clap-On commander's name from the Stalled Fleet Christmas card list and unfriended him on our Spacebook page.
The Clap-On commander was a total jerk called Darn the Unaccommodating.
He was pure evil.
He was a mystery.
He was a
The Clap-Ons had a word. Huck Patooey. Roughly translated as, we spit on you. And that's exactly what they were doing to us.
Yes, we spit on the humans often. To them, these planets were places where they could mine minerals. To us, they were sacred. They were where we held our semi-annual spitting contests. Intimate Six was where I would take hot chicks to make out.
intimate sex. It was nothing but a covered. And don't get me started on that Commander Darn.
We started calling him Darn the Crabhead. Then he destroyed 50 of our ships. We started calling Darn, he good. Not good as in good. Good as in bad.
It was the Clap-Ons who gave me my nickname, Vesta Vizod.
My nickname? Princess Buttercup. Those Clap-On.
They called me Candyman. After 2 years of constant defeats, the conflagration was losing confidence in Stallfleet's commander-in-chief.
He was a chicken.
In quick order, Scaredy was removed, and Admiral Makus Remembers was named as his replacement. People tell me they are afraid of the Clap-Ons. Well, I tell you, I do not fear them. I fear snakes and icky spiders. And I wet myself once when a cat jumped out of a trash can in a low-budget horror movie. But I do not fear the Clap-On Empire. What are you doing?
These medals are diamond-shaped and infringe on our copyright.
You can't do that. I'm trying to give a speech here.
Free speech doesn't interest us, pal. I'm gonna need the uniform, too.
Admiral Remember's speech was certainly memorable. Mostly because he was naked. You don't forget something like that. I've tried.
I tell you, today we will make our stand. We will fight for what's right. We will not let huge empires take away the things we hold dear.
Bring in the trucks! Until Remember's speech, I, like everyone else, assumed the conflagration had no chance.
Excuse us, buddy. We got a C&D for your ear tips.
You've got a what? Ow! Ow!
The first thing Remembers did was begin building a new ship that could take on the Clap-Ons.
It was the Airy class, and I was anxious to see what it could do.
The Clap-On Empire was not prepared for this. No, I won't remove my clothes. It's ours.
The Airy class was the first real warship the conflagration had ever built.
We bought it at auction. But I have the receipt from Sotheby's.
Axanar was at the center of conflagration space, and it would be the location of the ultimate battle of the 4 Years' War.
Infringement purged. Good luck with your movie.
Well,
I don't know why we removed it.
Oh,
There we go. When John first sent me the link, I don't know. He was worried that I wouldn't like it, and I was like, why do you think I wouldn't like that? It's not only is it hysterical, but it's it's amazing that someone would make a parody of our film, and it's homage, so I was thrilled. I still am. I mean, every time I watch that, I'm amazed at what you guys did. So
yeah,
tell us about your little team.
Sorry?
Tell us about your team. Tell us about the people that helped you make it.
Okay.
Your voice acting, your music, and whatever.
Well, so the music was actually Creative Commons. So Kevin MacLeod offers this music up as long as you give a thing. And we thought he basically was championing the fact that he felt as an artist that he should be able to determine if somebody wanted to use his music. It's the old thing of like a daycare being sued because they painted, Mickey Mouse on a mural on one of the walls or something. That
right.
There's obvious copyright infringements, but then there sort of becomes kind of a blanket thing that doesn't. So with the copyright theme, that made sense. There was another guy that Jonathan had brought forth who was going to do music, and I don't know what the situation was with him. I eventually said, I like to keep these fun. There's so much work that you don't want to have a lot of conflict or anything like that.
Right.
So then the fun thing too with doing this quickly and that kind of stuff was that the voices, everyone recorded them with their iPhones. So
really? Interesting.
Jonathan did several voices. I got a friend of mine to do Tropes, and he killed me every time. Though Tropes was my favorite in the movie because he was hilarious with the thing. I always loved the idea that the Tropes, they didn't have to ask to take his uniform. He just went ahead and went naked. And he had the big mom tattoo and that kind of stuff. And there was a guy I knew locally who I thought had about the same timbre of voice as you did, Mark Levine, who did the voice of was it Vest of Izod? And then another friend of mine recorded an absolutely filthy recording for I'm blanking on what salty
axle grinder.
Axle grinder, that's right. Yeah. I said you can just put in pauses because I just wrote it with beeps, or you can put in words. And wow, it was extraordinarily filthy. And so, but that was fun too. I love the idea of the juxtaposition of instead of her having, the nickname that was harsh and whatever.
Right.
The nickname was Buttercup, and that was what she was so mad about.
Yeah.
But
that's funny.
So yeah, people did that, and I mean, there were times when I needed to add a line or something that I just, text somebody or say, I quickly just record this line with your phone and email me the file, and so it had that kind of a quality to it. I always used to joke about the fact that and sometimes I'll think, oh, hey, I'm just like Steven Spielberg making this movie, but I'm really more like Ed Woods, I'm sitting there with a big grin on my face going, hey, I'm good. I'm making a movie. So So it had that kind of thing, and yeah, Jonathan was definitely a cheerleader. Everybody was excited about doing it, and my memory mostly is just that it was exhausting, because what I would frequently do is set the things to render overnight, because that was the slow process. You
Right.
do it, and then sometimes the frames would take really long to render, and you're talking about 24 frames a second. So I worked out with the application that I had that I could run 7 versions at the same time. So I would have each of them rendering every 7th frame, and the problem is that sometimes it would crap out, or sometimes there would be issues. So I didn't really get to sleep at night. I was constantly up, making sure the renders. Oh, it was really stressful. And I tell you, like I said, I keep forgetting how hard this is, because with the new one, I'm over 2 years now working on it. I'm tired. It's a lot of work. When I started it, I didn't have a full-time job, so that came on almost immediately. And then I had to switch software, which meant I had to pretty much remodel every model that I'd already worked on. Because one of the things in Foresight, when I did Wobbling Dead, I knew I was going to need buildings. So the City on the Edge of Forever was filmed on the 40 acres lot that Desi Lu owned at the time, which was also, people know it mostly for being Mayberry in the Andy Griffith Show.
Oh, okay.
And famously, there's a shot, because Andy Griffith was shooting at the time, they couldn't do a lot of redresses to the set. So there's famously, when you see Edith and Kirk walking down the sidewalk, they walk right past Floyd's barbershop.
Oh my gosh.
And conversely, the Mission was the old Grand Movie Theater in Mayberry. They took down the marquee, and since that was taken down, there's a shot in Andy Griffith of Opie riding his bicycle past the Mission. So you've got this cross thing. So I picked those buildings because I was able to find them too online. I said, okay, I want to build my own little backlot, and I'm going to make it this backlot because if I ever do City on the Edge of Foreclosure, then I'll have these buildings. Not knowing I'd end up having to remodel them anyways, but even at that point, it was always the big goal. The other one I always wanted to do, which would have been much simpler, was Balance of Terror. Because with the dog jokes, it could be Balance of Terriers. And instead of Romulans, you'd have Ruffulons, and you'd have bird dogs of prey for their ships. And that one would have been much easier because that's all shipbound and not as complicated as this one. But this was the hill. This was the mountain to climb. And so I'm having a great deal of fun with it. And
good. So tell us about you're obviously a comic collector. What are your other passions? So comics, what comics do you collect? Your Marvel, your DC, what?
I was mostly DC, although I liked a lot of Marvel. I haven't collected comics in any serious way in quite a long time. My big period was through the 80s and some of the 90s. And I jump back in every once in a while. But
it's easier with trade paperbacks, these days, graphic novels.
The trade paperbacks are easier. I tell you, the big thing for me is growing up, I always loved the fact that when you were reading like a Marvel comic or a DC comic, there'd be a little box from the editor. And it'd say, see Avengers number 212. And you would go, wow, there's this thing and it can tell me the rest of this story.
Right. Right.
Once they started rebooting every couple of years, that all went out the window.
Yeah, I know.
It's hard to know what the continuity is, and then also as a consequence of that, nothing really has a consequence. Why should I worry if a character's dead or anything, or if you're going to reveal some secret in a year, they're going to reboot it and it won't matter. So I just kind of fell out of doing it, but I loved comics, and actually that was my big goal initially, was to do comics. A friend and I self-publish a couple of comics in '94, which was a fun experience. We didn't know anything about what we were doing, and we decided to do it in color, which ensured that we would never make any money. But and then we did a graphic novel, and we've done a few since. Every once in a while, I've mentioned before we did the Star Trek story that we had originally done in '92 and put online. So and that was always the big goal. We always really wanted to do Star Trek comics, and unfortunately never got to do that for real. But there was nothing to stop us from doing fan comics, and we enjoyed those a lot. I wonder what to do. I've got, I think, around 3,000 comics that I still have, and I keep thinking, I don't know that they're worth anything anymore. I think one of the things that people didn't realize when they thought comics were worth stuff is they were worth it to baby boomers whose moms had thrown away their comics when they were kids. And then once they were grown-ups and they had money, then they wanted to rebuy those comics that they had. So they had value then, but not so much anymore. It's a great time if you do want to buy old comics, because there are some that are definitely worth lots of money, but the most of them you can pick up now for relatively cheap because there just isn't a market for it. And I know I think Marvel and DC both have options that you can read a lot of their old comics digitally. I think Marvel has a subscription service, and DC has the DC Universe. The streaming service actually has a bunch of comics, thousands of them. And so, chances of rereading them but I sentimentally, I can't get rid of them.
Yeah, I have like the surviving comic collection I've had for 50 years. With my original Tales of Suspense and Captain America's and all of that. But yeah, I'm like you. I haven't collected comics in years. It's just, and I haven't even, honestly, I stopped reading them at some point. I think The Death of Captain America was like the last real series that I read, and then it just, I don't know. I think I'm with you. It's the fact that they keep rebooting it. It's just like, stop already. I don't need another number one issue, right? I just should, and so that's why I think it's cool that Action Comics hit 1,000. Was it 1,000?
Yeah, they're all doing 1,000. Detective Comics. I think the next thing is 1,000. Detective Comics 1,027. 1,000 issues with Batman.
Oh yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
But the thing, I picked up a comic just in the last week, and I needed a magnifying glass to read the lettering.
Oh my gosh!
Not only because I'm old, but because now that they do it, with fonts and stuff, they can get away with making very small type. And I was like I look forward to reading this once I can find my magnifying glass. But I think I read a book years ago about legacy IP, and they were specifically using as an example the Lone Ranger. If you remember in the late 70s, when Superman the movie came out, all these corporations were scrambling to see what they had because it was a big success, and they thought, well, we own Popeye. people love Popeye, let's make a Popeye movie. Or we own the Lone Ranger, let's make a Lone Ranger movie. We own the Shadow, we own all these characters. But they were corporations that owned these legacy characters. They weren't the companies that originated them. They were just an asset that they had. And I see that with comics and Star Trek and Star Wars and all that. They're legacy IPs now. They're corporations who say, this is a valuable property we have. We need to find out how to make that work. City on the Edge of Foreclosure is looking like it's going to be about 17 or 18 minutes.
Okay.
So obviously they don't have the sense of history with it. They weren't originators of it. They weren't things. And comics have gone from being, I mean, the original comics were done by guys who didn't have any love for comics. They were hired, especially during the Depression. This was good money for an artist because you could do pages quickly and they paid decent. So these guys got into comics and their market was, I think there was a 3-year time between like 9 and 12 or something like that you read comics, which is why they could recycle, the villains and stuff every 3 years, because they knew if they waited a gap, the kids would have gone on to reading novels or something like that. It was just comics were seen as an intermediary between, picture books and prose books. So, but then you had like the next generation come in who had read comics in the 40s and grew up on comics. And so they loved the comics. How many generations now are we from that? We've got people who love the originals, who, loved 3 or 4 versions of them down the road. So they're not going to really have the same objectivity, I guess, in working on these characters. There's a lot of, every time I see anything with these characters, there's a lot of nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Remember this other thing about this character that they really didn't do when they were originating the stories. And I think that, again, they're not aiming these at 50 and 60-year-old people. That's not the audience. So I'm not in that group.
Well, as far as Star Trek goes, do you enjoy the new Star Trek that's been coming out lately?
I almost feel like it's a little masochistic for me to watch it. I've tried to watch Lower Decks, the new one. In fact, I just tried to watch another episode today, and I realized that there's such a divide between what I think of as Star Trek and generationally where we're at now. I was really noticing today when I was watching an episode that the guy who has studied all the Starfleet manuals, who wants to be a good officer, is played off as a moron and not effective. But the people who just bounce around and don't know Starfleet regulations are the ones who are the smarter ones, the more clever ones and stuff. And there's this idea, I think, that I always thought of Starfleet officers as having had to work to be the best of the best. They didn't just, hey, put on this uniform and you can be chief engineer. That wasn't the way it worked. And again, I think too, it was aspirational. This idea was that we love these characters, and as much as I love Captain Kirk, I wouldn't want to be dropped into the command chair of the Enterprise, because I know I don't have the skills that Captain Kirk has. I look up to Captain Kirk for having these skills. And I get the sense that the new version of it is this idea of I don't know really how to put it into words, but it's just, instead of Captain Kirk, who's not somebody you can really be, Michael Burnham or something is somebody who could be us. We could be put into that situation, and then we would still excel, which is a different way of looking at it. It's not a hero worship. It's more of putting ourselves into it. And I think comics did that to a certain degree. There was a point where, they started trying to make the heroes more human, have more faults, more, and even the Marvel stuff where they did have the problems or whatever, they were still people who rose above them, and they weren't seen as really being mortal. They were still mighty. And I think now there's a sense that, the first thing to think is, well, are they crazy for putting on a costume? So maybe they have mental problems. Are they a drunk? Are they what are their foibles that we can do so that they're not better than us? And I don't generationally, that's not the way I see it. I view these characters as teachers, as people to inspire us, not about me being in the story.
It's a different way of looking at it. But Marvel really brought that whole, especially with Spider-Man, and then with the X-Men, brought that whole personalization of heroes rather than idolization of heroes.
Right. But it was a balance still. Spider-Man was still a great hero. I think really, and I was reading comics when it was happening, things like Watchmen, The Dark Knight Returns, that was the point where they started saying, well, maybe these guys aren't heroes after all.
Anti-heroes. Yeah.
And maybe it's arrogant of them to assume that they're heroes. And I think that really fundamentally changed things. And I think the thing that I think of is that was so powerful at the time because we were used to the way heroes were before. So that was a fresh take on it. But now everything is that way. So I don't.
Right.
You don't have that contrast.
By the way, Tiffany, I collected Captain Canuck when it came out back in the 70s. 70s or 80s. I think it was late 70s was Captain Canuck. And I have original issues. There were a very limited number of issues. And they've revived that character, I know. But so there you go, Tiffany. Olive Jeff says, I think sometimes there's themes where a lot of the actually talented people get held back and the yes people get ahead. Even people that actually just overestimate themselves can feel that. I think, it all gets down to a storytelling, a type of storytelling that people can relate to. Yeah. And maybe we're just in a different time where, characters are viewed differently and people relate to
well, our parents had a completely different view of things than we did. It's a generational thing. At a certain point, we are no longer the hip young crowd, and the hip young crowd is the audience. They're who you want. So I understand that. So I'll watch the new Star Trek. And there'll be aspects of it that I still enjoy. I still love Star Trek, so I'll watch it even if it's, not my favorite or anything. I think if I really had something that I would actually pin on these that I do not like is both Discovery in the second season and Picard introduce these sort of magic items that I call. Discovery had these magic time crystals that you could use just to go. There was no science behind them. They were just time crystals. And then at the end of Picard, he gets handed what looks like a flute or something, and you can do anything with this flute. And,
Use your imagination.
And I'm like, Star Trek.
Use your imagination.
Yeah. Star Trek is science fiction. Star Wars is space fantasy.
Right.
You know, it's literally long, long ago in a faraway land. It's a fairy tale. And
right.
It has the science fiction, facade, but it George Lucas himself said at the time, this, after 2001, I'm not trying to make a sci-fi movie. This is space fantasy. This is gun shoot. You don't have to reload them, and you can duck. I was thinking about this the other day. Is there? You can't dodge a phaser or a laser. It moves at the speed of light. So
right.
There's no way for somebody to start firing and you jump out of the way. That's no fun for a space adventure. So but Star Trek always tried to at least say, this is kind of plausible, or we're going to come up with an excuse or reason why this works. We're not going to just say it just works. And I really felt like, though, that took me out of both of those shows. Certainly there's a lot of other things that you can get to, but that was sort of my fundamental thing, because I think Star Trek inspired so many technical people because of that. It showed us a future that wasn't, just slapped together and pretend. It said, okay, here's how these things work, and we're going to try to have rules for how these work, and we're going to keep to it. And it made you believe in these things and then think it's possible to make these things.
Right.
And I feel like when you do that kind of thing, that's where you veer far away from Star Trek. DC Fontana died this year, and I don't know if you've read these. I think these are the Voyages. These Mark Cushman.
Mark Cushman. I was just talking to Mark the other day. Yeah, I have them right there on the shelf.
I love I loved going through those. The production notes and stuff. But one of the key things is that they used to send tons of memos to each other, arguing to say, we said in one episode that you can't beam if the shields are up, so we need to remember that as a rule. And then they actually, would have a technical advisor who would say, okay, that won't really work, but here's something that might work.
Right.
And they would keep track of all of those things. And as an audience member, that might not be important to it. But if you're a fan, then that adds to the whole thing. The world seems more real when there are these rules that they don't just, toss out every single time. And I know people can get caught up on Canon or things like that. And that's not really what I'm talking so much about, as the world needs to have the rules, and and you need to respect those and still keep those, or else then it really is just fantasy. Then it doesn't have it. You don't have that same sense.
Or it becomes sloppy sci-fi.
You're right.
Right. It's just like sci-fi where your fans lose respect for the show.
Right. Your fans want. I think it's different nowadays when there's not a stigma attached to being, geek culture is very trendy and very popular. When I grew up, and I'm sure when you grew up, talking about how I love Star Trek was a good way for people to all move away from you to the other side of the room.
Yes.
And so there was an aspect where you wanted people to recognize the value that Star Trek or the comics had. I can remember as a teenager, I love Batman comics, and everybody's version of what Batman was Adam West. And I love the old Batman show, but you know, I was always trying to tell him, no, Batman's really serious, and the Joker kills people, and this isn't you know, biff bam pop. You wanted the people to understand that, and if your show doesn't support you in that, if your show doesn't feel that it's that serious enough to warrant it, then it's hard for you to feel you want to defend it. But again, you know, I'm an old man, and we didn't have nearly as much stuff to stimulate us as people have now. I mean, there's millions of hours of television and movies that you have access to. I mean, we could have never imagined this idea. I mean, I think even in Star Trek, I always thought, I wonder if on those data cards, if they had like every movie or something like that. But now we have, you know, we just go to one place and we just go through and we can find. In fact, there's so much that it's impossible to watch everything. So I think that's the way the young people now are just, they have enough for this much.
Right.
They can give this much to something because there's too much.
There is too much. There's too much.
Yeah.
Jim says, "Well, Jim. As far as Adam West being the only real Batman, I guess that's to the point that Mark's making is that I just think, you know, like for me personally, I grew up on that Batman,
right?
And then I never read Batman comics ever, so that was my Batman growing up. And then I read Batman comics in, you know, maybe the 90s. I would read a few. You know, or the early aughts, I started reading some Batman, some JLA, some things he was in, you know, maybe The Killing Joke or this and that. And I don't even listen to Adam West. I don't even that Batman and that Batmobile, which is awesome, it's something totally different. Awesome. It's not the comics. It's not the Batman of the comics. It's Earth 127. It's something totally different. It doesn't work.
But it actually was the comics of the time. I mean, the first few episodes were all, you know, they took an actual comic story, and I mean they embellished it obviously, but that was the level of what comic they were written for 9-year-olds. So when you presented it to grown-ups, it was hilarious. And I remember I didn't see it obviously when it first ran. But when I was like in 2nd or 3rd grade, they would show it in the mornings before we'd go to school. And I thought it was deadly serious. I can remember my dad laughing. And I'm like, why are you laughing? They are in real danger. You know, they're trapped in a giant ice cream sundae. They're going to freeze to death.
That's good. Well,
so, you know, when you're...
Go ahead. Oh, you froze there.
And it's... shows. The Dark Knight definitely did change Batman. He was already more serious, but the Dark Knight Returns made him dangerous. That was when the idea was that Batman was maybe a little not right in the head. And again, that was refreshing at the time, but now it's the status quo.
And it's interesting because just reading everyone's comments here, some people love Adam West, you know, and others other Batmans. You know, I don't know that. I honestly, Ben Affleck's my favorite Batman of all the Batmans. I mean, I never could take Michael Keaton seriously, and Val Kilmer just he wasn't Batman. And then George Clooney, I think, could have been a good Batman, but he was in a movie. It was just
here's what I think about Clooney would be a great Bruce Wayne.
Yes, right. Clooney is Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
You know, and Christian Bale just didn't do it for me. Here's
the thing. You know, if you were a kid in 1989 and you saw Michael Keaton as Batman, he's your Batman.
Right.
And so you know,
I kind of came in of a little bit of an in between period. I love Adam West. I loved reading Batman. I read him mostly in the 80s, but I love the Batman animated series. I don't think the Tim Burton movies hold up as well as they haven't aged well, but they were fantastic at the time visually. And there was the idea that they were still saying, this is a serious Batman. Kevin Conroy is the voice of Batman. If I ever read Batman comics, I hear Kevin Conroy's voice.
That's funny.
That is he is Batman as far as that goes. But I can appreciate them from different periods. But again, that's taking it out and realizing that these are different productions and different shows and different versions. It's not, this is the same Batman the whole time. And I think we've lost that.
Well, listen, it is. I think we have to accept that there's always going to be different incantations of different characters. And that's okay. And we're seeing it right now with DC. Look at what DC. DC's got Rob Pattinson movie. DC's come out and says this isn't the same universe as the Justice League. You know, and I'm like, wow, that's really cool. I mean, DC's doing it. It's like the one thing they're doing right. It's like they've got the whole Arrowverse on TV, and then they've got the JLA on the movies, and now Rob Pattinson, that's a different one. And that now we're going to have Flashpoint, Flash movie. I mean, so they're using the multiverse to their advantage. And I think that's a good way to look at it, because they're never going to be, but just because they've done so many different things with all the animated series, right? I mean, you think of Marvel's success is movies. Marvel's success on TV is limited. Even on Netflix, as much as we love Daredevil, Daredevil is the best superhero TV show ever on TV. But as much as we love that, the other ones are okay. But DC has done very well with different productions and different media. Animated series, TV, movies. Marvel, it's like all movies. Like Marvel is a 10 out of 10 on the movie front, but TV,
Marvel successfully took the idea of Marvel Comics and made it a Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yes.
So the thing that everybody loved about Marvel at the beginning was that Spider-Man could go past the Baxter Building while he was swinging around New York. All of these were interconnected. It wasn't made up cities like Gotham and Central City and Metropolis and all this. They were all in New York. They were together. And that's the success of those Marvel movies. They all interconnect. And so you can go see a Captain America movie and Iron Man will still be there and everyone thing. They did that extremely well. And to be honest, I don't think a lot of kids read comics. Well, I know they don't because the sales are so poor.
Yeah.
And to me, that's mind-boggling to think that you had an Avengers movie that was seen by 1 billion people. And then if you look at the Avengers comic, they sold 70,000 copies that month. How did they not translate? How did they not get those kids to walk out of that movie and pick up a comic? That seems to me like...
Listen, people don't think that the movies are comics. It's too, we're not thinking, people are like, those are movies. It's not, in this day and age, it doesn't translate. But listen, we're gonna have to cut it. We're gonna have to cut it short because, as always, I have doggy duty, so I have to take care. The dogs are getting restless, so I've got to take care of our pups. But I want to thank you for showing up. We'd love to have you back another time. This is great. Talk about all pop culture. We can't wait to see the next installment of Stalled Trek. Not too far away. Yeah,
once I finish it, I'm going to put together a trailer, and so I can show people some of it.
Absolutely, we'll have you back then for sure.
Okay,
and promote all your stuff. So, but thanks for coming out. We appreciate it. Thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. Tomorrow will be Starfleet Tactical, so make sure you join us there then, where we talk about spaceship combat, and then Sunday, back to Axanar After Dark. So, and Two Geek Girls is tomorrow too. Thank you for reminding me there, Alyssa. That's right. Two Geek Girls. 8:30 tomorrow. 8:30 to 10 is tomorrow.
Yep.
And then 10 o'clock will be Starfleet Tactical. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for showing up. We will see you all tomorrow. Mark, live long and prosper, my friend.
You too, my friend.